Hello all, this is going to be our lesson for ancient China. Please keep in mind that I will want some discussion questions from you. So as you're taking notes, have that in the back of your mind. You might want to throw some questions down. You are writing these Cornell, of course, so have those questions ready later on when we have a discussion about this lecture. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about this. Now, when we compare the U.S. to China, we can see, and we're talking modern day, of course, not ancient China, but I do want to make, this somewhat relevant to you guys. So if we look at the actual landmass itself, we can see a high similarity as far as the size of our two countries in comparison. So the size itself, China slightly larger than the United States. We do have some similar physical barriers in China. It would be the Himalayas. For ourselves, it would be the Rockies. We use the Rockies as what divides our country physically. So we have the eastern part of the United States versus the western part of the United States. That's typically defined by the Rockies. Now in China, there are actually two main rivers. You guys mapped it the other day, so do keep that in mind. You should know these. For us, we have the Mississippi. That's our major river. Now, don't discredit other rivers also. So we have a lot of smaller rivers here in the United States. So does China. But when we look at the smaller rivers like the Colorado, the St. Lawrence, the Potomac, these are small in comparison to the Mississippi and China's two major rivers. The Colorado, if you've ever seen it, it's tiny in comparison to the Mississippi. The Mississippi is, a major river when we're talking about the planet. Okay, our population densities or concentrations. China and the U.S. pretty much same thing. The East Coast. Now, for us, one of the reasons why the East Coast is so populated is because that's where we started out. Okay, if we look at the West Coast, we haven't been here as long. Sooner or later, it'll probably, get pretty packed. It already is. So if we look at concentration centers like Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, all the way up to Washington, we do have concentrations of people in these major cities, but nothing like our East Coast. So if you've ever been to the East Coast, highly, highly populated in comparison to the West Coast. Just driving along PCH, or the one it's referred to as, you'll notice for long stretches, you'll see, pretty much empty coastline. You'll see a lot of rolling hills with no huge population concentrations for quite some time. Now, connectivity problems for China, it's from north to south. Okay, one of the reasons is because you have to cross some major rivers. For us, it's east to west, the Rockies. It does make it difficult. It's a very long span to cross. Here goes some topography of China. If we look in this general area, pretty dry. Okay, so we don't really see that much population in this area of China. For China, it's roughly this area along the coast, more inland over here. But here in these deserts, just like ourselves as well, we don't have a huge concentration of people in the middle of the desert. Well, Phoenix, but that's kind of out of the norm, if you will. Bodies of water, we did map this. So the Amur River, Huanghe, the Yangtze, the Xi River, South China Sea, Pacific Ocean, Yellow, Sea of Japan. So we do see some major bodies of water that you guys did map the other day. All right, so this idea of brown China versus green China, I don't like the way this looks. Let's go and fix that real quick. There we go. So brown China, we see brown China more in the north. We see wheat dominant, and green China down here in the south. Pasture oasis over here in the more arid regions. Now we refer to this as green versus brown because wheat typically dominates this northern part, and that's all due to climate. Wheat grows well in this type of climate, as where rice more over here tends to be a little bit more tropical, just like our country. So the more north you go, the cooler it gets. The more south you go, close to a body of water, more tropical wet it's going to be. Okay, so up here, kind of dry, a little arid, extremely dry, and then down here, pretty moist. Okay, it also helps that we do have the major rivers in that area as well for rice production. Now, if we're talking about rice production in China, one thing it's interesting to note is that if you do a comparison of caloric intake, so that means how many calories your body is intaking, rice in comparison to wheat, rice has more calories. So when we look at populations in China, we can see how they're able to sustain such a large population, and a lot of it deals with your ability to intake calories. The more food you have, the more people you can have. It's pretty simple. All right, top 10 populated nations. These dates are, of course, a little old. Well, 2001, not 2050, but 2001, we can see this growing or this shift in population. China did have a policy, the one-child policy, where it disallowed people to have more than one child. One caveat with that, however, is people who lived in rural areas, there was a little bit of wiggle room because you needed children to help you in your agricultural endeavors. We do see India, or we foresee India increasing in population. If they continue at the same rate, they will end up surpassing China. Okay, so currently both these countries at the moment have over 1 billion people in their current population. For us, it's about 3-ish, 300 million, somewhere around there, 300, 350 million. So when comparing the actual population, we do see a huge amount in China and also India. We did talk about population just a bit ago. So this kind of goes to show the density in this coastal area, and of course in this very dry, arid region, we're not really going to see a whole lot of folks, and that's because it's comfortable to live. It's hard to get resources out there, lack of water, and who wants to live in the middle of the desert? All right, here is one discussion question for you. Keep in mind, I do want you guys to create your own questions as well. When you are creating your own questions, remember, what's confusing to you? What do you not get about the notes? What needs to be explained? What can we talk about in class? Okay, so it doesn't have to be relegated just to the notes. If you want to know further information, ask your question. All right, so for this discussion question, what geographical features have helped protect the United States from invasion? Because if we look at our country in comparison to other countries, we really haven't had that much conflict in comparison to, say, like Europe, where we see World War I, World War II, a lot of the wars prior to that. And if we look around the globe in general, we do have a lack of conflict here on our soil in comparison to other countries. So give that a spin, see what you can come up with, okay? All right, so the 4 old world river valley civilizations, we've got Egypt there over on the left, which we talked about, Mesopotamia we've talked about, India we've talked about, and then finally we're talking about China. So this is when we're talking about one of the major dynasties in China, this would be the Shang. The Shi came first. We don't know too much about the Shi, but the Shang most definitely we'll be getting into. India, of course, we did discuss. So roughly around the same time, these civilizations were beginning to arise all at the same time. So it's always neat to see a comparison. Oh, well, what was going on in the Shang dynasty? What was going on in India at the same time? Mesopotamia at the same time? Egypt at the same time? So it's interesting, at least for me anyways, to see what was going on in roughly the same amount of time. So if we look, the Shang dynasty, it's concentrated around this river. And then, of course, we'll see another chunk of population concentrated around there as well. So like I was saying, the first dynasty, we don't know a whole lot about the Shi dynasty, but as far as timeline is concerned, we're going to talk about the Shi just a smidge. The Shang, the Zhou, I know it says ZHO, but it is pronounced Zhou, the Zhou dynasty. The Qin dynasty, this is the shortest, so when you see those quotations, anything that's above, just hang it on down. That is a note-taking tip, so you don't have to write China again, just write those quotes. Anything that's above it falls down. Same thing with dynasty, it just falls down. So China's longest dynasty, China's shortest dynasty. And then, of course, next, the Han dynasty after the Qin. This is one of the most respected dynasties of ancient China. All right, so just talk a little bit about the Shi dynasty. Not too much, like I said. Begins with the Yellow Emperor. Remember Yellow River? So this kind of, an organizing factor is these river valley civilizations. Legend has it he ruled for over 100 years. Now, the truth in that, probably not. Okay, people usually don't live that long, but that's the legend. Okay, this is the dynasty associated with really early inventions like wheeled vehicles, ships, armor, pottery, silk making. So really this was prior to the historical period. Now we do have some writings that tell a little bit, but not really just anything to speak of. All right, so next the Shang. So here's the Shang. So while the Shang was going on, we have the oldest Indian civilizations, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, like we discussed. We have Uruk, if you remember reading Gilgamesh. We have the city of Ur, and then of course Egypt. Okay, and being that it's united, this is Egyptian or normal main Egyptian history, seeing that both of these kingdoms are united at this time. All right, so the first writings that we have in China, so this becomes the historical period, are referred to as oracle bones. Now, oracle bones, yes, it's writing, but at the same time, what it was is they'd take like a scapula or a wide piece of bone from an animal. They would inscribe these symbols onto it, and then they would heat it in a fire, and they would wait for cracks to happen in the bone. And this would tell the people doing this whether things were going to come true or not. So for using this as an actual real primary source, it's kind of difficult, okay, because we don't know if they were trying to portend that this was going to happen or if this is actual history. So it does become difficult to put this in context. Was this actual history or is this something they wanted to happen? So oracle bones, not an exactly reliable source. All right, evolution of Chinese writing. So we have some pictographs going on from here to here to here to here. So obviously this looks almost nothing like this, but that's the progression. Okay, it's the progression of their writing. One of the most difficult languages to learn. Not due necessarily to the speaking, but more to the writing itself. All right, next we've got the Zhou dynasty. So the longest of all dynasties, 1027 to 256 BC. Do that math in your head real quick. Try to figure it out. This is where we begin to see early Confucius principles beginning to develop. We also see Taoist principles beginning to develop at this time as well. This was a male-dominated society. Even today in China, we see a male-dominated society. Because as time progresses, though, things do change a little bit, but for the most part, pretty male-dominated. All right, so we have this idea of Tianming. So this is also referred to or translated to the mandate of heaven. So what Tianming is all about is, well, number one, leader must lead by ability and virtue or the correct way, the Tao. Okay, so when we hear that term, the Tao, it simply means the way, the correct way. Like the way water flows downhill. So you just need to make sure that you're doing the correct way. The correct way to be a leader, of course, in China, it's by virtue, doing the correct thing. You lead by example. Number two, the dynasty's leadership must be justified by succeeding generations. So if you want a continuous dynasty, generation after generation after generation, there needs to be some relationships there. Okay. Number three, mandate. So this mandate of heaven can be revoked if the ruler isn't a good ruler, if he is abusing their people, making them suffer. The will of the people is highly important in the mandate of heaven. Remember what I've said before. As soon as a civilization cannot provide for its people, it will cease to exist, in its current form anyways. All right, so we're going to have to take a break there, and I'll get back to you soon.